Hello, mamas. Welcome back to another episode of the Reawakened Mom podcast. And I am here today with Lonelle Madsen, and she is dedicated to empowering parents in raising their children to navigate the complexities of, wait for it, everyone, dating, relationships, and sexual intimacy with confidence and wisdom. So I cannot wait to just feel her confidence and all of her wisdom just coming through me right now, like the speakers, like your ears, whatever. Like, I just cannot wait for this conversation because, as I just shared, I have a 14 and a 17-year-old at home, and we're in all these things. So, I can't wait to be educated today. So,
I love it.
welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. It's nice to be here and be available to all your listeners.
Yeah, I can't wait. I know that the women that are listening and the moms that are listening are really going to get a lot from this conversation, and I know I am going to gain a lot of knowledge from this episode and all of your information because these are conversations that I'm having, and it's like I'm like tongue tied. So I can't wait to see what nuggets you have to share with us. But before we dive into all that, real quick, like tell us a little about you. Like if you want to share about what you do, like being a mom, any of the things, like tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Let's head back to 1990. 91, I became a teen mom. And so I was quite young. I had her at 14 and 2 months later turned 15, my
Wow.
daughter. And that is really why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. I was a single mom for 25 years. After I had my daughter, I had another fatherless child 9 years later. And so I raised two kids on my own. And I got caught up in the sex industry and was able to get out of that because it is this mini microcosm of a world and can be quite destructive or keep you very stagnant, but got myself out of that and ended up forging a career and starting a practice in sports and medical massage therapy, and that was very successful and burnt out royally with that at the same time that I started to date my now husband. And now I am a wife and a stepmom. And, that was a whole midlife crisis there too,
Mhm.
trying to figure out who I am. I don't have to be the breadwinner anymore. And I'm living with my mother-in-law. And now I'm a daughter-in-law and a wife and a stepmom. And I'm not doing my practice, and the whole identity caught up in there. Trying to give you the very short
I
version
love it. I
of a
love it.
long story. And then since I've been married, and well, I should say now I'm going to be a grandma. My daughter is
Oh,
19 weeks pregnant.
oh my God.
So
Congratulations.
thank you. Um, and so it's been a, a process of figuring out who Linnell is now that I'm, not this single mom and this very independent, strong breadwinner for my kids. And so I've been trying to figure out, what to do with all of it. And it was actually just June last year, after learning for years about digital marketing and online coaching and all that. Because I did try and take my practice online, and I was trying to force that.
Hmm.
But it's I had a major revelation in June, and it was like, of course, I need to help parents. I need to take this message to a younger audience, but it needs to be supporting the parents on this major life altering pivot that we all have in our lives when we get into dating and relationships
Hmm.
and sex.
Yeah.
So
Wow,
there, I'll
that
pause
is
there.
so much. I'm gonna have you back just to like jump into all that because you dropped so many amazing nuggets. So tell
Okay.
me, so how old are the kids plus the stepkids? I'm just curious
Okay.
what the ages are.
Okay. So from oldest to youngest, is the only daughter, 32, 23. So those are my two kids. They're the
Okay.
oldest. And then my stepsons, 'cause they're all boys, 20, 18, 15, and 12.
Wow. Okay. So
Yeah.
that was probably an adjustment. I mean, I'm also a stepmom, so I have currently at the time of this recording, I have a 14, a 17, and then I have a 30-year-old stepson. So I, was came in a little bit backward from you. You became a mom first and then the stepmom. I was a stepmom first and
Wow.
then leading into having my birthing my own children. So that is I have a really good episode all about being a stepmom too, because it's not something that's talked about a lot, is like being a stepmom and what that is and where is your role in being that stepmom, because you're not the mom. So anyway, we could totally dive into that, but like that is something that I feel like again is not talked about enough. And
Sure.
it is one of those confusing places to be in. So you're in this midlife like crisis, you called it. You're all of these things are changing, and then you're becoming a stepmom, and then you're like, what am I doing? And then during that time probably was around the pandemic and all
Yeah.
of the things. So I love this. I shared with you and earlier just about having my own teenagers at home. My 17-year-old, my 14-year-old, they both currently have girlfriends,
Mhm.
the dating, the sex talks, like all of the things. So where's the best place to start? Is there like an age where you start? Is there a conversation where you start? How do we kind of jump into this as parents that are like, I have no clue what I'm doing?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is even though this is what I am teaching and facilitating help with, I mean, I can't claim to know it all either.
Yeah.
There's too many variables and, too many, everyone's so unique. Everyone's child is so unique and their situation's so unique. And so, um, but I found like some of the principal things is to know that like you're never not teaching it because you're always modeling what relationships look like. And I think we all know that
Hmm.
instinctively. Um, but as far as like the actual pointed talk of the sex talk, I think that there's a couple things to keep in mind. Um, First of all, I learned long ago that if your child's asking a question, well, then that's the indication they're ready to know the answer.
Hmm.
Now there is some adjustment around that, based upon their development, how the answer is couched or, framed. But my daughter at 5 years old, I lived with my mom because my parents divorced, and I have a lot of sisters. And so naturally, a lot of our conversation would be making jokes about sex or something, anatomy. You know how girls can
Yeah.
do that, and sisters and moms can do that. Not all, but and so my daughter was around that. Not that we were being terribly inappropriate. It was just it was casual and it was making light in a good way and the camaraderie we had. And so she asked me at 5 years old what sex was, and I gave her pretty generic answer. And 2 weeks later, she asked again, and I'm like, okay, she needs to know. And
Mhm.
so I told her exactly. May I say it here? I
Yeah.
want to ask permission first. I just said, well, it's when a man puts his penis in a woman's vaginas. And she was 5. I needed to just be very clinical about
Mhm.
it, but not way up here either.
Yeah.
And so she just said, why? Kind of in that like
Ew.
grossed out way. And I'm like, well, because it feels nice. And she's like, okay. And
Yeah.
that was it. I mean, that was it as far as that moment, and as the years progressed, because I was honest with her, because I know she got to validate that in her social circles at school and friends, like, oh, my mom told me the truth. um she never stopped coming to me for truth.
Mhm.
So I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest piece of it, is knowing that you're always leading by example, that someone's always watching, your child's always watching. And they're comparing, what are you saying to actually what are you doing.
Mhm.
um, and so just matching that up with, where they are in their development, their maturity, whether male and female. For example, like me and my daughter have always been close, and certain movies we grew up on, one of them in particular, I introduced to my stepsons, and as soon as we put it on, it was like, oh no, this is not right for them. So it's being in tune with like, the particular development of each child, and then phrasing those things and approaching them in the right way for them.
Yeah. What if your child isn't coming to you and asking you questions, but that if maybe we started and like go back to dating, like, how do you know to kind of even have this conversation if they aren't maybe talking to you about it because maybe they're embarrassed or maybe you haven't, had that relationship before about that, or it's just kind of like
Sure.
something you don't talk to and you skirt it. How do you kind of bring it up?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had experience with that with my stepsons, and trying to honor, the boundaries of where I am as a stepmom, and where their mom is their mom and their dad is as their dad. Luckily, me and their father are, in alignment on a lot of these things. And for instance, when our 18-year-old was having his senior ball or the prom, I was like, okay, Ben, that's my husband's name. I'm like, you need to really make sure that you emphasize, like have bring up this topic again, because I know he's talked to him about it before, but I don't know how. I don't know all the details.
Yeah.
But I'm like, you need to make sure that you're, talking about this, because there is that unspoken expectation out there, at least in some kids' minds, about, sex is going to happen during the prom, or
Mhm.
it's this big event, especially he was dating someone. So it's it's taking those moments that, are those milestones that are coming up, and preparing for them. And a lot of parents, we just don't know how to do that. That's why I'm trying to help support in that actual preparation. But I think having just planting the seed that, like, we know you guys are dating, especially if you can do this in a family situation around the dinner table, is actually a great idea.
Mhm.
Not that you go deep, but that you just go, we know that you're, starting to date, and we should talk about these issues, and just set the intention that or set the tone that, that you're aware of what's going on. You have this intimate relationship with your, girlfriend or boyfriend, and we're here if you have questions, and we would actually like to have a discussion. But then that's where you kind of like, you got to back off
Mhm.
and give them room to consider that. And I know a lot of them won't. They'll resist it, I should say. But you can just find opportunities in other examples, like things you see in the media together. Because a pretty routine thing that a lot of parents, I believe, encounter, a lot of kids encounter with their parents, is they'll see something really hot and heavy on TV, and then that, like, uncomfortable, awkward, rigid
Yeah.
awkwardness like creeps up, and it gets quiet. And it's at that moment you should um probably point out to some degree, I get it, this is uncomfortable watching this, or come back to it later. I just try and encourage parents, and do myself, like, if you recognize you're uncomfortable, then that's what you lead with,
Mhm.
because
Like,
that's
what do
the
you mean?
truth.
Like, for example, so if you recognize you're uncomfortable with it, like, do you say that? Like, I'm feeling
Yes.
uncomfortable. Like, do you feel uncomfortable? Like, what do you mean by that? Can you give an example or?
Yeah, I think it's, especially as they're in their teen years, it's a demonstration of your, like, you're more than just a parent, you're a human, and you experience these uncomfortable feelings
Mhm.
too. And yeah, I would lead with, like, I'm not really good at this. My parents weren't really good at this. It's usually the case.
Mhm.
Um, but I want to do better. And I realize this is uncomfortable for me, but I feel a responsibility to talk to you about sex, and about these things we see on TV. And I want to make sure that you can come to me.
Mhm.
I'll do my best to tell you the truth, and support you and not judge you.
Mhm.
And it's being vulnerable with your children.
Mhm.
And sometimes that's really hard, when we want to appear as authority figure, but that is actually the way to do it. And I've had to relearn that a lot. Like,
Yeah.
you earn that authority figure by being honest about your own weaknesses and your own discomfort around the topic.
Hmm.
So,
Can I ask you a question? So what if you, like I said, I have, two boys. It doesn't matter, male or female, whoever, but what happens if you encounter, because social media is just so crazy right now, and there's so many different things on the social media platforms that if you don't have boundaries set or different things set on your kids' phones, that they can easily potentially stumble across. So, do you have a way, like if you've discovered that your child has stumbled across something that maybe is a little bit more advanced or a little bit more racier than maybe you'd kind of want them to have that image out of, like, this is what sex looks like between someone that loves each other? Like, do you have a way that you might bring that up or talk about that? Have you encountered that before?
yeah, so I raised my daughter when there wasn't really cell phones around. I raised my son when there, started to become cell phones around. And so that's, I think that comes to mind, that
Hmm.
example of, your child might have a phone and then they have easier access to
Yeah.
some of these things. Of course, there's parental controls you can set on
Yeah.
them. Um, but with my son, as soon as he started to enter high school, I wanted to talk to him about pornography in particular. And I shared with him I shared with him, just my own feelings on it and the dangers and risks. And luckily I'd already kind of established that conversation, that open
Hmm.
conversation with him.
Yeah.
Um, Not that he was super engaged, but he knew,
Yeah, I'm sure he was like, "Whoa, whoa."
yeah. I did go dig up on YouTube. There's an interview of Ted Bundy and his admission about that he was addicted to pornography, and that kind of fed into his psychosis.
Mm,
And that he also explained that almost every felon in prison with him had that addiction, and it was violent porn that they ended up getting into.
mhm.
So I shared a little bit of that interview with my son just to help him see it wasn't just mom's opinion,
Yeah.
you know. And I mean, ultimately, it's well, as a parent, you have to just do what you think is right and teach them and show them that those boundaries, that healthy love looks way different than
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And it can be a slippery slope.
Mhm.
And we all are human and have our weaknesses, have our vulnerabilities. And so these are the risks you take. And then you have to let go as a parent and let them find out for themselves.
Mhm. That's so hard. Like, when you said that, I immediately was, like, tense. I'm like, "What do you mean, like, go?" That's the hardest. For me, it's like that control, raising these little guys, and you do all these
Yeah.
things for them, and then, starting to cut that cord again of, like,
Yeah.
"Okay, but this is the age and this is normal," but that doesn't mean that it's any easier.
No, no, it's hard.
Yeah.
And what comes to mind is I think on some talk show decades ago, it was about parenting. Someone said, remember that when your child becomes a teenager, you take a demotion in parenting.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
And that's how I've actually approached step parenting too. It's kind of this demotion from mom or dad, but even in, the teen years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Is there anything, because I feel like we jumped the gun before we even went to dating. We were like, let's just jump into sex. Is there
yeah.
anything that you feel you haven't covered on this topic that you feel like would be really helpful?
Yes, because you really can't separate them very much.
Yeah.
I think as silly humans, sometimes we try. You see that in the world. Like, can it just be casual? We're not quite biologically and physiologically designed that way. But I started really early. Well, one thing I didn't tell you about my background is my daughter's father, our relationship was abusive. And I was a teenager. And, so we both very inexperienced and but it was an abusive relationship. And the pregnancy is actually what got me to walk away from that relationship. And it was the best thing for me though, because I had to understand what happened. I had to understand so I wouldn't attract the same person, same type of person, or the same behaviors, and I wouldn't become them myself. And how could I sculpt my life in such a way that would leave just a loving partner, that I was attracting. And so I worked hard to really understand what abuse looks like, how it shows up, how to detect it within myself, how to recognize it. And so teaching that early on to my kids, like looking deeper, trying to understand, people have their motivations, even as, young kids have their motivations for behaving certain ways, and trying to help them parse that out is, I think, crucial, because inevitably, if they learn what abuse is and what love is, then they know how to constantly identify it and sculpt it out of their lives in their relationships.
Mhm. So how did you teach them what abuse was? Do you mind sharing that, or do you work into that, or is that something that you have your parents or clients like talk to their kids about dating and like what this may be, or I don't know. Is that something that you could share?
Yeah, I think so. um, let's see. I think, it would a good example is when, well, first and foremost, when my daughter realized her dad wasn't around, I made sure I wasn't ever bad mouthing him, and he made his choice to not be there. I made my choice to be there. And so I got on with my life and trying to provide with her. So right there, I was setting, a better example as far as what a parent ought to do.
Mhm.
And so, but then in our conversations, when she realized, why isn't my dad around? I'd let her know, you're right, that a loving dad should be there, and it would look different. He would be showing up, he would be visiting regularly, he would be having you regularly, he'd be supporting you, he'd be supporting us financially to some extent, and um, I just kept validating that, like, you're right, it looks different than what you're seeing. This
Mhm.
is neglect. And unfortunately, she got to see him raise his other kids with another partner. And so that's been devastating. So, but I've done, the work of going back to that, like, you're right, your dad should be here. And that's what a loving father does. And there are reasons, like he came from a broken family, just trying to help her see, depersonalize it by seeing like he's coming from another tough situation where he wasn't modeled great fatherhood
Mhm.
either. And that's helpful, but it certainly isn't like, oh, we're okay, that's not an issue anymore.
Yeah.
um but then with like in other relationships, friendships, and then eventually with boyfriends, um it was just helping her go, okay, well, how do you feel about the way this person's treating you? Like, what do you need to do for yourself? Did you talk to them about this? It's being present and helping them through, like, navigating the conversations with them, navigating their own feelings about it, helping to sort that out so that they know what they need. And it's a messy process for
Yeah.
sure. And it is a lifetime process, as you
Mhm.
probably know. So,
Yeah.
um, I don't know that showed up that much different, other than it was just constantly something I was willing to talk about and point out and validate, but then also helping my kids recognize, well, what is your part? How are you contributing to this? How are you getting in your own way? What are you, and this is something I still have to do with myself, like, what are you expecting the world to do for you that you're not doing for yourself?
Mhm.
And it's not just a question like that's pointing out you're not doing something for yourself. It's a sincere question, like, what is it? There's something you need, and you're probably, instead of realizing you have some skills and abilities to meet those needs yourself, you're looking externally for that through your relationship. So it's
Mhm.
so vague sometimes. I hope that wasn't too vague.
No, it's all challenging. Like, it's just all difficult and no one knows how, and it's like if your parents didn't talk about things with you, then you're like, I have no idea how to do
Yeah.
this. And you're trying the best you can and just hoping that you don't mess up your kids, and like,
Yeah.
I don't know, things that you're saying, or trying to make them feel bad about things that maybe they're doing or hearing, or in relationships that they're in, and not questioning things and letting them figure their own way, which I think is one of the most challenging things in this time period of like the teenage years and them going
Yeah.
out on their own. I feel like that is like the most challenging part, because of course you don't want your child to be emotionally hurt, or obviously physically if there's physical abuse, but just like mentally, or you just want them to be happy. So it's just figuring all that out, like what your role is, and not always trying to fix it.
Yeah, I think that will always be tricky as parents. It's instinctive to, really want to protect them and help them not experience the same pains that we went through, and we have firsthand knowledge how to avoid. And
Mhm.
so, I think it's a natural reflex and a good one. Um, but I think as parents, we need to realize, we're stewards over our children. They are their own person, and they see their world through the lens of them as the center of it, and we all do that. And so, making room for that reality to be like, they need to experience things for their own personal growth, their own personal revelations and understandings. And I mean, that's what I had to go through with my abusive relationship. And um, it was the most powerful thing I could have gone through.
Mhm.
Um, and so it is this constant balance of like preparing them, but not over protecting them. They're here on earth for a purpose, and they have their own path,
Mhm.
and to help, to just support them and love them through that path. And with my daughter in particular, I would call it sit in the dark with her, because she ended up developing borderline personality disorder, and was hospitalized 4 times for
Mhm.
suicide attempts.
Mm.
And that's actually another big reason why I'm doing this work, is because um, I ended up choosing abstinence um, after getting pregnant again a second time out of wedlock. And I chose that because I grew up LDS, and I'm still active. I wasn't always active, clearly. um, but I finally was like, you know what, my way isn't quite working. And I chose it on purpose. And I realized, well, there's a lot of wisdom in that, and waiting till you have a very committed partner to then go into this very intimate world of sex, and sharing your body and your mind and your heart and your spirit with one person. Because I learned that with borderline personality disorder, One, and this was back in, I don't know, this was probably, I guess not that long ago, maybe 10 years ago.
Mhm.
I learned from the healthcare professionals that 1 in 10 people have borderline personality disorder, and 1 in 10 people with it successfully commit suicide.
Mm.
And borderline personality disorder, if you look at all the criteria or its characteristics, um, it's rooted in abandonment issues. And I think about the generational impact of, now my daughter has this mental illness that, has affected all of her relationships. And you just can foresee, like, this is devastating.
Mhm.
So I that's something not talked about either, is why abstinence is valid and powerful.
Mhm.
And and that's actually finally what, like, helped me get ready and be prepared for the right man.
Mhm.
So
Wow.
yeah. And I don't deny, like, most kids nowadays are not going to practice that. But how much of that is because it's not necessarily preached? And even in, like, conventional religious circles, it's expected, but it's not really talked about. And so that's a problem too.
Mhm.
Um, my work caters to the Christian community, but I specifically don't want it to be isolated to that either, because I don't want that separation. Um, those that are agnostic, or, just lovers of truth and, like, very spiritually centered parents and individuals, like, I want to make sure that I'm loving on all those people
Mhm.
and that I can be a
Yeah.
part of their world.
Yeah.
Um, but it's weird living kind of in between there, because I am active in my faith as a Christian,
Yeah.
but yeah, so there's no illusion that we're in a world where that can be frowned upon or just, like, completely disregarded. Um, and I want to say, I think a lot of that is because it takes a lot of strength. You have to develop a lot of strength in order to commit to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we tend to shy away from things that are hard. So I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah. I have loved this, and you have shared so many great tips
Oh.
and just hard conversations, just kind of educating, you know what I mean? And insight. Is there anything that you haven't shared that, you feel like is on your heart to kind of put out
Mm.
there?
Yeah, I I really long to hear your stories. And it's great to be on a podcast and talk about me, but that's not where, sorry, it chokes me up. It's not where my heart lies. My heart lies in hearing you and serving you and helping you on the most important work you can ever do in raising your children, um, and our families. I guess I'll say that.
Yeah. Oh, well, how can people get in touch with you then? So if you want to hear their stories and be connected, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Um, well, I am starting a free Facebook group to for this purpose,
Mhm.
so that I can learn firsthand what parents need and work with them, and in real time create digital tools and products and strategies for them to use, and, for their families and for their specific children. So I guess the best way is to, I know texting is not what people usually recommend, but I would recommend that. And then, should I just say the number?
Sure. If you
Okay.
feel comfortable doing that, and I'll put it in the show
I
notes
do.
too. Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off. What was the last thing you said?
I'll put it in the show notes. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Yeah, it's 888-278-0773. So, That's my business public number. So you can just text me. And if you say 2024, I'll know you're interested in the group. Um, I will put it out there that I know it's tough times and most everything I'm doing is very low ticket. I don't want finances to be a barrier to working with anyone. Um, and yeah, that's probably the best way.
Awesome. I'll make sure I put that in there. My last question before we jump off today. We as women do not celebrate ourselves enough,
Hmm.
and look for the good in ourselves. So I would love to know, what is something that you love about yourself right now?
Hmm. Hmm. Um, I really like being goofy. So because that's so fun. That brings instant fun and connection with others. So I like that about myself. So
Awesome. It's important. It's important to be able to laugh and be goofy because,
yeah.
yeah, times can be hard. And so it's like, if you can laugh or make a joke or something like that, or make light of something, then, it just puts, it's kind of like, you can lower your shoulders, and like take that breath
Yeah.
and be like, okay, like we're okay here.
Bring that into the sex talk with your kids. Humor.
What? Oh,
Humor.
humor.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's why my daughter felt so safe coming to
Yeah.
us, coming to me and asking.
Okay. I'll have to have note cards. I'll be like, be funny. Like, okay, the joke is, so I'll be like sweating under my armpits and like my face is
Yeah.
all red. I'll be like, where's
Yeah.
my
Your
be funny?
kids will love seeing you like that.
Yeah. Oh, they do. Believe me. Anytime that, yeah, they can see me sweat, it's like, haha,
Yeah.
got her. Awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation. And I can't wait for everyone to listen and, tell us what they thought and what they learned and what questions they have.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Hope it
Yeah,
helped.
absolutely. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.